Well, hello there, and welcome to a debugging activity. So, what do I mean by that? Well, as you have probably learned, a lot of programming ends up being about debugging, which is to say that you write a program and it doesn't work. And you fiddle around and it still doesn't work. And debugging is all about this practice of how do I fix my broken program? And what are the kind of the tactics and strategies and what are the classic kinds of things that go wrong? And part of this is that you just have to build up experience with debugging and the kinds of problems that come up in a program. But part of it is just having a kind of sensible, measured approach to how you debug your programs. And that's sort of what I want to model today. So I'm going to go through an activity where I debug a very, very broken program. You will never have a program that's this broken because it's like I've gone back through it and destroyed the program for you, so to speak. So we'll see what happens. I mean, I'm going to do my best to debug it in the best way that I know how while I talk about what I'm thinking. But it might be difficult and I might make mistakes. So let's just see what happens. Okay? So debugging activity. Over on the actual activity page, let me just quickly review what we've got here. So as I said, I'm providing some very broken code to debug as an example. And this is the accompanying video, as you might imagine. So this is what the code is meant to do. It won't do anything in the beginning because it's completely broken. It's going to display 6 food objects, which are pink circles, in a row across the middle of the canvas, equally spaced from one another. 6 of them, and it's going to allow the user to move a circle around on the canvas with their mouse, and if the user's circle overlaps a food object, that food object should disappear, meaning that it was eaten. So that's the project. It's a simple program. There's not a lot going on, but because I've gone through it and made huge numbers of mistakes, we are going to need to do some serious work. Crucial advice when we're debugging, you have to have the JavaScript console open, so we'll remember that. And we'll remember the key steps, which is run the program, identify an error. That's either going to be in the JavaScript console as like a red error message, or it might be that the program runs with no errors, but it does something wrong. Figure out the cause. So once we've seen the error, we're going to need to know like what is happening in our program that is triggering that error. Either by reading the error message or by kind of knowing what the program was meant to do. We're going to find where the problem is, and then we're going to fix it. A huge amount of debugging is about finding out where the problem is, right? Because once you know where it is and what it is, the fix is usually fairly obvious. And we're going to keep repeating this process until we have a completely working program. Quick note, because it's so important, it's really important to use some kind of package that will do auto-indenting and auto-formatting of your code. So since the beginning of the course, we've had Atom Prettier installed. That has an option in its preferences, format files on save, which is a useful thing because that just means if you're in the habit, which you should be, of just repeatedly saving your files as you work on them, it'll keep auto-formatting your file. And this will help you to see problems, basically. The formatting of a JavaScript file makes a huge difference to being able to see specific kinds of problems. Let me just reload this because I added something earlier. There is another package called Atom Beautify. Sometimes Atom Prettier, if the code is sufficiently messed up, won't actually do the formatting properly. Whereas Atom Beautify, often it can force the formatting a little bit more rigorously. Prettier is better, I think, generally speaking, while you're writing a program, and so it's probably a better package. But for this example, I'm probably going to end up using Atom Beautify just to force the formatting in. Okay, so I've already pasted this code into my Atom, but there's the code to debug. You can see it looks horrible, right? All of the indenting is a mess. There's a lot of stuff wrong. So let's begin. Here's my program. So the very first thing I would do, if it were me, and it is me, hi, it's me, is I would want to format this code, because you can see that the indenting is terrible. Like this is indented too far, so is this. These are indented too far. This curly bracket is indented in the wrong place. It makes the whole thing so much harder to read, okay? And that's bad. We want to be able to read our program at the very least. So let's select all of it and go to Atom Beautify, which is one of the packages that I have installed, and I'm going to hit Beautify. Prettier isn't, for some reason that I don't personally understand, isn't reformatting, but Beautify will. Bam. So now all of the indenting is correct in the sense that it is adjusted to be correct indenting if we had written our program properly, which we haven't. Now down the line, that's going to help us to kind of notice a few problems. You can already notice something like this, right? Function setup and then create canvas, the first instruction. Normally that should be indented like that after a function definition, but it isn't. The fact that it isn't is telling us one of the problems with this program, which is that we've missed out a curly bracket here after setup. If the curly bracket were there, create canvas would have indented correctly. So indentation can tell us a lot about what's going on in our programs. Prettier, you will notice, can show you some error locations, which is useful, but I'm going to rely on the JavaScript console. So let's do that. So let's run. I'll stop it first, I suppose, and then I'll run it. Over in Chrome, it loads up, and we get a blank screen. Unsurprising since it's so devastatingly broken. So let's look in the console. View source. Oh, Jesus, that's terrible. Not view source, but JavaScript console. Okay, and now we have errors, right? Now this error here, the favicon error, is something we don't care about. It's just a sort of default message that you get from web pages if there is no favicon. Doesn't matter. This error here is the one we care about because it's in our script, right? You can see it says script.js line 11 and it says unexpected strict mode reserved word. Okay, line 11. Now that's a pretty challenging error message. It makes sense to me, but it's not something that we need to kind of grapple with right now. Let's assume there's something potentially wrong on line 11, which is here. Okay, so the actual error message is telling me that that is the problem. Strict mode reserved word means I'm not allowed to use let as a property name in an object or as a variable name. So is that the problem? No, right? Because I'm not using let as a variable name or a property name here. I'm declaring a variable called food2. So whenever we see a problem and the line that you're looking at doesn't actually look like there's anything wrong, that's a standard variable declaration, you should always look above that line to see if there's a problem earlier. And often for a lot of errors, the problem can be on the line immediately preceding. So back up here, right? So here it says user size is 100. What is that part of? That's part of an object definition, right? Let loser is assigned, and we'll talk about loser later on maybe. Open curly bracket to define the object. X is 0, Y is 0, user size is 100. What's missing from this? I haven't closed the object, so there's a missing curly bracket there, right? That I need to match the one that opens this loser variable object definition. And you can see in Atom it's highlighting that these two parentheses match now. So the problem here was that this line was being seen as part of the object and it wasn't written correctly to be part of an object definition. So I save, and now the problems have moved somewhere else. I'm aware that, let's not worry too much about what Beautify is or isn't doing. I think part of the problem here, by the way, I was hoping that this would kind of auto-format these things correctly. Part of the problem here is simply that the program is so broken that I think that Beautify and Prettier don't actually know what to do. So let's just continue back over here to look at the next error. Line 17, unexpected identifier. Okay, line 17, unexpected identifier. So that's here. Unexpected identifier always means that JavaScript saw something that it didn't expect. Again, we look at this line. This is a completely normal function call. Create canvas 600, 600. Nothing wrong with it. So we should always be thinking, what's on the line before this? And that's this line here, function setup. We already talked about this, right? We're missing something here. And what we're missing is every time we have a function definition, we say function, name of function, parentheses, open curly bracket. And notice there, as soon as I add that curly bracket there, all of these function names have gone blue. that is also something that we can look out for, right? When it's missing, all of these function calls of create canvas and create food, they've gone white. And that's because the sort of the highlighting part of atom doesn't know what they are because we're missing that curly bracket. It's getting confused. So that's another clue that something is wrong. So if I throw in my curly bracket, now we have a much better looking function. I'm highlighting these things, and I'm using the prettier atom shortcut, by the way, which is, where's prettier atom? There. Control Option or Control Alt probably on Windows F. And that's just allowing me to get the formatting right piece by piece. Again, because the thing is such a mess, I think Prettier is not able to format the whole file properly. Okay. So this is now looking proper, right? We've got function is aligned all the way to the left, and then all of the things inside my function are indented by 1. That's what it should look like. Back to JavaScript, sorry, back to the console. Another unexpected identifier, this one on line 30. So let's go look at line 30 here. Function create food, xy, we can see there's maybe a problem there as well, but let's carry on for now. What's the unexpected identifier here? Well, it's not telling us, okay? It doesn't tell us. This is irritating, right? It just says unexpected identifier. So something on this line is unexpected. When we get something like that, where it's not telling us what to do, we should sort of proofread the line, right? So we should say, well, function, that looks fine, spelled correctly. Create food is a perfectly reasonable name for our function. Open parenthesis is correct. First parameter is x, and this is where we see our problem, right? There's no comma between the x and the y. And this is one of those things where you just need to know what it's meant to look like, right? There's nothing to tell you that there's a missing comma. You need to know that there should be commas between the parameters. X, comma, y is what the program was expecting, and that has resolved that error. It's kind of depressing that as you resolve errors, all that you get to see in the JavaScript console is, oh, well, here's the next error. It doesn't play like a little fanfare congratulating you. That's a bit sad, but we can do it for ourselves. Maybe this could be a habit you can get into as you go, oh, there's a missing comma, ba, 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 and then you're happy. Everybody's happy when they hear a fanfare like that. So we've fixed that one. The next one is on line 41, invalid destructuring assignment target. Tough error message again. Again, a lot of the time I think what we're going to need to do when we're debugging is just look at the line where the problem is stated to be and then look above it if necessary. Because a lot of the error messages are going to be about things that we don't personally do in this course. Destructuring is something I've mentioned in some of the modules in the too much information section, but we haven't talked about destructuring, so it's not a very helpful error again. But nonetheless, line 41. Line 41 is here, right? So line 41, it's saying there's something wrong here, and there is something wrong here actually, and maybe in looking at it we would first try and fix the thing that is obviously wrong on this line, which is what? This says background. Background is not the name of a function in P5, it is background. This is again kind of proofreading, right? We've got a typo, background. So I save it, right? But this little dot, which is prettier, telling me where the most recent error is, and this error message here, invalid destructuring assignment target, line 41, has not disappeared. So that wasn't actually fixing the error that we were looking at just now. So again, when we have a perfectly reasonable looking line, we want to try and fix or look earlier on. So what is potentially wrong on this line? There's a couple of things. I'm not going to fix maybe the most obvious one right now because I want to be able to talk about what it causes later on. But importantly, when we write a function, we write function, name of the function, ignore the fact that that is a bit silly, and then we're supposed to have two parentheses, right? Not just one. So if I throw in this parenthesis, and again, look at that, look at the color change. So these were all red, all of these function names. When I put the parenthesis in, they go blue, which is the color that they are meant to be in this highlighting, right? So now these are highlighting correctly, and this function signature bit looks good. So we save, and indeed the error has moved. But now we've got the next one on line 50. Missing closing parenthesis after argument list. That one actually sounds pretty useful. Missing closing parenthesis after argument list on line 50, which is here. And we know that an argument list is the things that go inside the parentheses of a function call, check food. This is the argument. This is the argument list. And indeed, there is a missing parenthesis, so we can throw it in. And let's just, yeah, that's not what I wanted to do at all. There we go. Good grief. Okay, well the tabbing is really not looking so hot, so I'm going to do it manually in this case. I apologize, I'm jumping all over the place. Okay, so we fixed that one, right? We fixed it by just adding in the correct closing parenthesis. Okay, continuing on. Line 72, unexpected token, opening curly bracket. These ones are always, like, I don't know, potentially scary because things dealing with curly brackets can be alarming, but let's go look at line 72. There's a lot of other stuff in here that's not great. This white space here is not great. I don't really like that. I also don't like the fact that this is all being displayed on one line, so I might use the shortcut, which is Control-Option-F, to get them at least to go onto the correct lines, and then I'll tab them in to kind of match this other stuff. There's a whole lot of stuff that's like really, really gross looking here, actually, isn't there? Like all of the tabbing is kind of wrong. We'll revisit that in a little bit. Let me go down to here. Okay. Yikes. Okay. I'm not going to fight with the formatting too much more. This is depressing how poorly the formatting is behaving. So line 74, unexpected token, opening curly bracket. Here, right? So this is useful because it tells us what wasn't expected, which was this. So it wasn't expecting to see that. And actually the prettier message here is helpful. Unexpected token, this thing, expected closing parenthesis. So it saw this and it wanted a closing parenthesis. That's actually pretty helpful because we know that the condition of an if statement, d is less than user size over 2 plus food size over 2, it's meant to be inside parentheses. There's an opening parenthesis there at the beginning, but there's no closing parenthesis. So we need to put that back in. We save. Ba, 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 ba. The red dot disappeared, so we're feeling quite pleased about that. And indeed, we've got the next error. Line 90, unexpected token if. Again, kind of useful that it's telling us what it didn't expect to see. So line 90, we're almost at the bottom of the program, which is kind of amazing. Unexpected token if. So again, looking at this line looks okay. If food.8 with parentheses around it, opening curly bracket, that is how you write an if statement. Again, we should think, oh, well, what's wrong on the previous line then? And again, prettier, with this red dot here, is giving us a useful message. Unexpected token, which is what we got from the JavaScript console, but we're also getting expected opening curly bracket. And the reason it's saying that is that if we look on the previous line of code, which is a function signature, function display food, the parameter is food, we know that a function always begins with an opening parenthesis, right? Function display food, parameter, and then opening curly bracket. Ba, 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 the dot moved. And now the dreaded unexpected end of input on line 98. So unexpected end of input tells you that the program got all the way to the final line, which is line 98, and there weren't enough closing parentheses to match the number of opening parentheses. And this is where formatting, even though it's been maybe mistreating me a little bit today, can help. Because we can see that the indenting here is way off. If this is meant to be the final curly bracket in the program, then I would expect it to be aligned over to the left here, right? But it's aligned all the way out to the right. Now, to find, when we have this unexpected end of input, it means we're missing at least one closing curly bracket. That's basically always what it means. And so to find that, we need to check where that happened, right? And it's not necessarily right where we are. So one thing that we can do is we can just match off curly brackets. So we can say this curly bracket here, and if we click next to it, we can see which one it matches, which is the opening of the function display food. And that's correct. This function is correct. This one matches this if. So that's all good. So this function here is fine. We've checked this one. This one here matches dismay user. We'll come back to that, no doubt. So this function is fine, right? Those two curly brackets are matching. so we're still good. This one matches this if here, and this one matches this if here, but now there's a problem, right? This one seems to be at the bottom of the check food function here, but it matches the if. And so this looks like it might be our culprit, right? Check food has an opening curly bracket. Inside there's an if matching here and another if matching here. So these two curly brackets both match these two ifs, but there's nothing closing the check food function. And part of how we actually can see this is the indenting, right? Because this function here shouldn't be indented out to here. It should be indented the same as the previous function. So if you just draw a vertical line down from the previous function, this should be suspicious that this function is indented. Functions, generally speaking, won't be indented. So let's add that curly bracket back where it's meant to be, and let's save. Oh, and look, a lot of good things happened to our program just then. These functions are now all aligned to the left, and this is like just another example of how horrible it is missing a closing curly bracket, right? This function is now aligned correctly, and all of the subsequent functions are also aligned correctly against the left-hand margin. So we can sort of see that the formatting now is looking pretty good. Ba, 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 ba. That was a good one. Really, though, you should ideally not be seeing unexpected end of input errors, right? Because they can be very difficult to find. It's much, much better to be very careful about matching all of your curly brackets. Still, you can see, I think here, that the formatting in particular was very useful in this context. And in fact, in fixing that unexpected end of input, all of the formatting of the entire file is now looking good. It's all indenting nicely, functions are on the far left, so to speak, and then things inside the function are indented, things inside this object decoration are also indented, and it's all looking good. So we've still got problems, we've still got errors. Interestingly enough, Prettier no longer sees any errors. We don't have the red dot anymore, but we still have to keep checking the JavaScript console, right? Because our program is not running. So here's our latest error. Script.js, line 32, flays is not defined. Flays, okay, well, we probably have our suspicions about this, but let's look at line 32. Line 32 is here. Now, you could have a variable called flays, so it's not necessarily the case that this is abjectly wrong. The thing that's wrong here is that, at least according to the JavaScript console, is that there isn't a variable called flays that exists in my program, and so we can't use it here. But that's not the problem, and you can probably understand that. To understand that, we need to know a bit about how our program works, and we need to know that this eaten property is meant to track whether or not the food has been eaten, and we want to put true or false into that. So in fact, this isn't a variable name, this is a typo of the word false. Now again, it's very useful to pay attention to color, right? When this was flays, it was white, because JavaScript, the syntax highlighting, thought that it was a variable name, because variable names are in white, right? Like food 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But when we make it correctly a false, it goes yellow, because that's a value, like these numbers here. So again, when you're typing things in, if they don't highlight the right way, if they go the wrong color, you can be suspicious, and you can often correct these errors as soon as they happen. So false, not flays. Ba, 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 ba. Uncaught in promise. Reference error, food 1 is not defined, okay, on line 19. Line 19 here. So this is a good one because this is use strict helping us out. I've got use strict up the top here. So it's telling me food 1 is not defined. What does that mean? It means that I haven't declared the variable at some point. So this is often either it's a typo, that I've declared the variable with a different name, and then when I've used it, I've used a different name, and then it doesn't match up. But in this instance, we can look over here at our food objects, right? And we can see that there are some missing variable declarations. Food 1 is missing, so we can add food 1. But if we read this carefully, just because we might as well check up on this right now, we can see that food 4 is also missing. So let's pay attention to that too. So that kind of idea, say when it says something is undefined, but you think it should be defined, like you don't see a typo in the usage, like food 1 here, it means that you're not declaring it with the correct name, or you're just not declaring it at all higher up in the program. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, and now the program runs. There's no errors. So this is an exciting moment in any debugging sequence. Slightly disappointing, of course, because we still don't see anything at all on the screen. So we've moved beyond the syntax errors and the errors of reference errors. It doesn't mean that they won't come back, because it depends on what's causing this current problem, right? There may be more errors in the code that are going to bring up red messages here in the JavaScript console. But for now, we've finished those. So now we have to ask ourselves a difficult question, which is, why can we not see anything at all? And if we're going to answer that question, I guess the first thing that we should maybe think is, if there's no errors in the program, what is the first thing that would make something visible that I would expect to see in the program? Okay, so let's go look for that in the code. So variable declarations are not visible. The stuff in setup, we know that you can make stuff visible in setup, but in this case we're not doing anything that displays anything, right? We're just creating food objects. So it's not going to be in the create food function either, because this doesn't make anything visible. So to this point here, there's nothing that draws stuff, so we wouldn't be worrying about this stuff right now. We do know that things get drawn in the draw function. And we can see that the very first line that should display something is background, right? Background should be set to black. So the fact that we're not seeing that suggests that something is wrong in our draw function. In particular, it suggests that our draw function is maybe not being called. So, I mean, you can probably see the problem here, but just to sort of really ram it home, something I might do in this situation is be like, drawing a frame or something like that. I would put a little message in to check, is my draw function actually being called or not? I can kind of tell it isn't, because background black is not registering, but maybe something is interfering with that. I should definitely see my console.log once per frame. But I don't, right? There's no messages coming up in the JavaScript console, and this tells me that my draw function is not being called. So I can delete this. The first thing that you should maybe be suspicious about when we're talking about a draw function, which is something automatically called by P5, is you should really look at your function definition, right? And this line, we can see the problem. Function is fine, but I've called it drew instead of draw. That's why it's not being called, because P5 only calls it if it's called draw. Save. Ba, 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 ba. However, this might introduce some other errors, so let's go back. Because this wasn't being called, anything in here wouldn't be generating any errors, right? Because it wasn't even running. And indeed, now we have some errors, but we do have a black background, so that's like a cause for celebration. Draw is working. But we're back to fixing things in red, which is fine. This is just part of what we do. So line 43, move user is not defined. Line 43 is here. So you should look at that and be suspicious, because it's written in the wrong format. Whenever we write function names, we start with a lowercase letter, and this one is starting with an uppercase letter. Just to double check, let's go look for this function definition and find out what it is called. Here it is down here. So the function definition tells us immediately that it's called moveUser, but it's got a small m. So that's the mistake that we've made up here, is that we're calling the wrong function. So we need a lowercase m to call moveUser, and we save. We go back, sorry. Line 64, userx is not defined. Userx is not defined. Again, this looks immediately like a typo, right? And we can get better and better at this to a point where we don't have to kind of reason our way through it. But for now, let's just go and look at it. So 64, where's 64? 64 is inside moveUser. So here it is. It's saying this is not defined. We can tell pretty quickly just by looking at the next line what we intended to type here. This is user.y. We were trying to do something with the user variable, which is an object. We were trying to do something with its x property, but we dropped the dot. Okay. Fix that one too. Here we go again. Line 64, user is not defined. Oh, so we fix one error and then we get another error on the same line. That's pretty disappointing. So line 64, user is not defined. So it's telling me that this doesn't exist. Now looking at it, we would think, again, that looks reasonable, so I need to go and look back and see where it does get defined, if it gets defined. So let's scroll back up. Where's the user? And we noticed this probably early on, but here's the definition of the user. What's happened? I've called it loser instead of user. It's like a pretty sophisticated joke that I was making there in my breaking of the program. So it's not meant to be called loser. I could go and rename everything that says user down below to loser, if I wanted to, and that would make the program work, but it's meant to be called user. So let's call it user. Ba, 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 ba. I would also have to have changed that to loser size, which is like a kind of really sad exercise. Nonetheless, we've fixed that one. Okay, chick food is not defined. Pretty clearly, this is going to be a typo, right? So line 48. And at a certain point, you can see things like this, and it's just like, it's really just showing you where typos are, right? So chick food is not defined. Go to line 48. Where's line 48? There. Chick food, you can see from its brethren around here that it's clearly meant to be called check food. You could also go and check the function signature to make sure that it's called that. But we know that it is. Okay. Line 53, display user is not defined. This is a bit more suspicious because this looks like a good function title, right? Function name, display user. So line 53 is this. So it's saying this is not defined. It's the same thing as with variables, right? If we see something that looks reasonable to us, like that should be what the function is called, or it seems very close, we need to go and check the definition. So let's go down to display user, or what should be display user. Now there isn't anything called display user, but we can tell both from where this function here is positioned, that's next to display food, suggesting it might be about displaying as well, and we can see from the comment, which says draw the user as a circle, suggesting that it displays the user, and we can see from the code, where it's clearly drawing something, and it's drawing something to do with the user because of our excellent variable names. All of that information coalesces to tell us that this is not meant to be called display user, although that could be a fun function to write. It's meant to be called display user, and that's why we were getting the problem higher up in the program. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, something else. 58, display FOD is not defined. Display FOD on line 58. Well, just before we head up there, let's confirm for ourselves that the function that displays food is called display food with 2 O's. Let's go back up to line 58. So it's another typo. Display FOD should be display food, right? Typos are one of the biggest sources of errors, right? So it's hardly surprising that there's a few of them that I introduced here. Ba, 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 ba. Oh, it works. So once again, we've escaped from the world of red error messages. However, we're not seeing anything. When I wave my mouse around, there's no circle following the mouse, and there's no food displayed on the page. So although the program now runs again, and we know that all of the stuff in draw is working, and basically every function is presumably being called, we're not seeing anything. So once again, we have to ask ourselves, well, what would cause us to see something? The background is being filled in, so that bit's working. What's the next thing that I would expect to see? So there's background, there's move user. This stuff isn't really going to display anything. So really, we want to look in display user and display food and try and understand why we're not seeing anything, right? So let's begin with display user. And I can reassure you now that I have absolutely no idea what's wrong with the program at this point. So display user, it does push, fill 255, displays an ellipse at user X and user Y and user size. Those all seem very reasonable. And then it pushes and pops around that. So that looks okay. So if you see something like this, what should you do? Well, it seems to me that it is meant to be drawing an ellipse at the user's position with the user's size. So if it looks all very reasonable, I'm probably going to want to find out what's inside these values because maybe there's something wrong and that's why we're not seeing the ellipse. So I'm going to copy those. I just copied them. And at the start of this function, although I could do it anywhere, I'm going to do a console.log and I'm going to paste those parameters in. Sorry, not parameters, just these values. So user.x, user.size, and user.y, sorry, wrong order. I want to print them out because I want to know what's in there, because that might be the culprit as to why this ellipse is not being drawn. So let's go look. And indeed, we have a problem, right? We can see on line 80 all of these messages. We have, this is user.x, right? The first one. I could have written a more descriptive message, but because I'm just going to do this and then delete this log, it's okay. So user.x, user.y, they're fine. And then user.size, which is the third one, is undefined. So this is undefined. And if this is undefined, then when we use it here, we're not going to see an ellipse. So let's remove that line. So what could be causing user.size to be undefined? Let's go look at the very beginning. Let's start from the start. So user.size should be in here, right? So here's my user. So user.x, user.y. This is its size, but we've given it the wrong name. It's called user size, which is another kind of exercise. And it should be called just size, right? Because we're wanting to access it with user.size. We could access it with user.userSize, but you can see how that's maybe a bit redundant. So we rename it. Save. Now I'm not going to make my fanfare because I want to go back and look at my program and see if that made a difference first. Ba, 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 ba. We've got a moving user circle. Not a loser circle, it's a user circle. Great. We still don't have something else though, right? We don't have the food that we said was going to be displayed on the screen. So we've kind of fixed the user. We now need to think about the food. But we're making real progress at this point. Okay, so what displays the food? It's display food. So let's go and look at that now. Display food. Okay, so check if the food is still available to be eaten. If food.ate, and then draw the food. Now, you can see a couple of problems here, right? And where you start depends on what you see first. So the first thing that you might see is down here. You might look at this and notice that this ellipse is only being given two arguments, the food's location, the x and the y. It's not being given a size, and so if it's not given a size, it's not going to draw anything. So we should go back and look at what the name of the property of a food object is that determines its size. Thinking, yes, we're going to solve this. So here's create food. It's the thing that creates foods. And we can see that when a food object is defined, it's got a size property. So it should be food.size, right? So in here, we would say food.size. Now, we might want to play a fanfare, ba, 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 but let's go and look at it again. So we've fixed this, we think. Oh no, there's no food. Okay, so there's still no food. So there's still something wrong here. The next thing we might want to do is the same thing that we did before. Let's do a console.log, and let's copy these and paste them in here, because maybe there's something wrong in the x and or the y or the size, right? So let's save that and see what it tells us. And now we've learned something. We haven't learned the thing that we were expecting, because we thought maybe we would see undefined. Instead, we're not seeing anything in our console. Now, what does that tell you? It tells you that this line here is not happening, ever. It's never running, and so if that's not running, then this is also not running. So that's why we're not seeing anything. This ellipse is never even being called. Why would it not be being called? Well, we know that it's inside an if statement. So if it's inside an if statement and it's never being called, it means that the if's condition, food.ate, is always false, right? So why is this always false? Now this is a moment where you need to know something about how JavaScript handles truth and falsity. And one of the things you need to know is that if you provide something that's undefined as your condition, which we suspect food.ate might well be, something that's undefined is evaluated as false. So if food.ate were to be undefined, and I think it might be, then this will be false and will never do any of this. So what we want to do is check out this whole idea of food.ate, because clearly whatever it is, it's making this stuff turn out false. So again, we probably want to go back up to our food. Here it is here. Here's its definition. Inside create food, we've got x, y, size, and eaten. We don't have anything called ate, and that's what the problem is. Because we're trying to access a property of the food that doesn't exist, .ate, it's evaluating as undefined and therefore not working. It's kind of a shame that useStrict doesn't catch that for us, but it doesn't. So it's called eaten. So let's go change it. Not food.ate, food.eaten. And then we save this again. And now, ba, 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 kind of. I mean, we're seeing messages in here, right? That's good. Weirdly, no messages at the beginning, though. But now I move my mouse around and the food is appearing, not disappearing. That is confusing. I'm regretting breaking it in this particular way. So let's rerun this again. So nothing, but when I move the mouse around, I moved it to there and then that food appeared. And now you can see it's displaying. So the display thing is now working. and we can see our message, and nothing is undefined. But when I move the mouse around, food appears. It's like it starts off that they're not there, but then when I touch something, they appear. So the fact that it's kind of occurring as an event makes me think that it's related to the idea of eating, but in reverse. So let's go look at our code again. So if we're looking at draw, we know that they're displaying, and we know that the user is displaying, so that's all fine. And we know that the user is moving around with the mouse because that's working. So that's suggesting that our culprit might be in check food, right? Because check food, as we may remember from how we would have written this program in a non-disastrous way, that is something that should make the food disappear when it gets eaten. What we're seeing is that food is appearing in some circumstance. So let's go look and see what's going on here. So check food is saying if not food.eaten, so if the food hasn't been eaten, calculate the distance between the user and the food, which seems reasonable. Oh God, I'm scared. And if the distance is less than their two radiuses, then food.eaten is set to true. But that seems wrong, right? Like that. Well, sorry, I shouldn't say that. I should say that seems right. If it hasn't been eaten, check the distance, and if it's small enough, then you should say that it has been eaten. So why, at the beginning, are they not being displayed? Let's go back down and look at where they get displayed. And here we find our culprit. So I was all excited about finding that .8, and so I moved on. And this is a classic thing that can happen to anyone. You may have seen the mistake here before I did, and that's completely fine. I wasn't pretending. But it's easy to sort of focus in on fixing the thing that you're currently noticing and not noticing the bigger picture. So there's still something wrong in the way that the food is being displayed, which is that it says check if the food is still available to be eaten, but here we're checking is it already eaten, right? We actually want to check the opposite. We want to check if it hasn't been eaten, because we only want to display it if it hasn't been eaten. I'm going to get rid of this line just for the moment as well, maybe as well. No, actually, I'll leave that in there for now. That's fine. So what we want to say is actually not, just like we did in check food, right? If it's not eaten, then display it on the screen. So let's go take a look and see what difference that might have made. Oh, much, much better, right? So, oh, Jesus. Okay, well, that was weird. So let me reload that again. So we've got 4 foods displaying, which is not 100% what we wanted, because it's meant to be 6. I'm also looking over here in the JavaScript console, and I'm glad that I left in the thing that was printing out the parameters for display food, because we can see there's another thing that's undefined here, which is the y of something, one of the circles. It's whichever circle has an x of 450. So we'll check that out as well, and then we might need to come back to that again. There's something else weird going on, which is like that they're disappearing when my circle is super far away from them. And then these ones aren't disappearing. Like, that's really confusing to me. I can't remember how I did that. But for now, maybe let's focus in on this undefined. So it's saying that the food at 450 has an undefined y. So let's go look at where it's assigned its 450, which is when we create it, right? And let's just examine these, because there's weird janky stuff going on with how these foods are appearing. So the first one is created at 5300. That seems reasonable. So, and let's also remember our canvas is 600, 600, just in case that's relevant. The second one is created at 100, but negative 300. Negative 300 would be off the screen at the top. So I think that's pretty obviously not what I was intending to do. So let's correct that. And if we jump back, indeed we can see, still a bit messed up, but we can see that there's one more appearing now, which is a good thing. 50, then 100, then 250, 300, 350, 300. Here's the culprit for the other missing one, which is that we're only giving it the x argument, right? They're all meant to be at a y of 300, so we say 450, 300. And now we've got all 6, which is good. We can see that the second one is kind of shifted to the left a little bit, so that looks like a mistake in its x position. So we can see here this one's 50, then 100, then 250. So yeah, we've just got the gap wrong, right? This is meant to be 150 because they're meant to be spaced by 100 per circle. Wonderful. Okay, so now all of the foods appear. So we've debugged that. successfully. I'm going to remove that console.log now, because I don't think we'll need that anymore. So we've fixed it. So now the remaining weirdness I can't eat these two. The middle two vanished when I wasn't actually near them, and I can't eat these two. The heck is going on there? That is confusing. So I don't know the solution. I don't know the answer to this question. You would think it was something to do with how we're checking for the overlap. But what it is, we don't know yet. Let me go back up here. And they disappear up there as well. Goodness me. Yeah, wherever my circle is, those ones disappear and the other ones do not. Okay. So that sounds like it's a checking thing again, doesn't it? So let's look at the checking function again and just read it carefully. So if the food hasn't been eaten, which is correct because we only want to eat food that's not eaten, calculate the distance between the user and the food. Maybe you're getting frustrated now. And if the distance is small enough, then set food.eaten is assigned true. So we need to look in there for a mistake. This is a tricky one to spot. Hopefully just by proofreading carefully, you might zero in on these arguments here, which is that we're calculating the distance between the user and the food. And you can see how easy it is to gloss over this, right? Like I did a few times. I didn't remember this was the problem. But you do need to read closely. So you need to go deeper and deeper into it until you find the problem. So let's, instead of just saying calculate the distance between the user and the food, let's read the arguments. So the distance would be between the user's x and the user's, and then we run into it, the user's y, right? We don't want the x and the x. We want the x and the y, and the food x and the food y. So let's change that and save it. And now these ones are behaving perfectly. So ba 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 ba. Oh, what? So that one works, that one works, that one works, that one works, that one works. And this one doesn't want to be eaten. What is going on? Okay, I don't know how that's even possible. So the food 6 is not allowing me to eat it. So I have a suspicion. Let's go and think about this. So it can't really be in check food, right? Because check food is clearly working because we can eat foods 1 through 5. So this can't really be the problem unless there's something special about food 6 that's causing it to behave differently from the other foods. The only thing that matters in here about the food 6 would be its x or its y or its size. So we could go and check how it's being created maybe, but we don't see anything very different, right? And it's clearly displaying at the correct position. So really maybe one of the first things that you would leap to in a situation like this, which is that each of these calls is related to check food, right? That's what's controlling whether it disappears. If only one of them doesn't work, we should look into whether it's even being checked, right? And that would be in draw. So check food 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but not 6, right? So that is where our culprit is it's not being checked in the first place. We have to do check food 6, or you're not going to be able to eat it. And that, beep, 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 beep. Oh no, is it going to work? Beep, ba, 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 ba. We have completely debugged this program. That was actually slightly arduous. I'm guessing this is a long video, but you know, debugging is a long process. This is a huge argument, obviously, for saving your program often and checking if it still works. That way you don't have to spend however long I just spent debugging a giant program. I hope you were following along and that you kind of enjoyed that. I find debugging super fun, super interesting. Those exasperating moments are equaled by how satisfying it is to find out what went wrong. Okay? So dump. So that was terrible, and I just said that. So I think we're all kind of sorted out right now. There's my mouth open. That was a good experience, I hope. You can see that the big process was there's sort of an initial kind of rush where you're just fixing red error messages in the JavaScript console, and that takes an amount of time. And then you end up with the behavioral stuff where it becomes much more of a kind of detective-y logic work. And I find both of those processes can be pretty satisfying. Again, you'll probably find it more frustrating than somebody with more experience, just because it's harder while you're learning. But the more you practice and the more you kind of remember the sorts of things that can be going wrong, and the more that you just allow yourself to take the time and be patient, the better you'll get at debugging. And I'm confident that you'll be great at it in no time at all. So that is it for me and the debugging activity. Hope you enjoyed it at least somewhat and you enjoyed the bug-free program that we ended up with. See you in the next video.